She was the caretaker for her husband with Alzheimer's, and they lost their van, the shed in the back of their trailer, which had her scooter in it. So she was basically isolated in that trailer for 2 or 3 months after the storm without any way to get out.
We're in Moonachie, New Jersey, near Teterboro Airport, where Lucky Lindy years ago took off on his epic trip to France. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Sandy, the Hurricane Sandy. Sally, what's the story with recovery here in Moonachie? Where exactly are we?
Okay, Moonachie is in Bergen County, New Jersey, and there were 2 communities seriously affected in our county. We're here in Moonachie and Little Ferry. Also some other smaller isolated areas, particularly Lyndhurst and so forth. We had a problem with the Hackensack River berm that let go in the storm, and that really caused a lot more damage than we would have expected.
So a berm is like a levee?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And we're here outside the First Aid and Rescue Squad, which was really hard hit. There's a senior center right down there that the first time I drove through, there were people from a volunteer organization pulling sheetrock out of the wall there.
So just to emphasize, this is, maybe we should get a little closer.
Sure.
But this isn't the Atlantic Ocean that did this. This is the Hackensack River. So
right,
what happened?
Yeah.
It just got
the storm
rose
surge.
and rose.
The same as the storm surge happened in the Atlantic Ocean. The Hackensack was much higher than ever. And the berm went and water all over. These are low areas. They do flood regularly to some extent, but nothing like this.
Mm-hmm. So you took me to a trailer park.
We have 2 trailer parks in Moonachie, Vanguard and Metropolitan. They were both underwater. They have issues of the insulation under the trailers, and of course when they didn't get the insulation out, then the floor goes. And the interiors of the trailers were flooded. People lost kerosene heaters, they lost bathrooms, they lost, you name it, you know.
And then I assume there'll be a mold problem.
It's certainly a mold problem. And especially now that the weather's getting warmer, if any mold wasn't eliminated, it's going to come right back. When they were pulling the insulation out, then of course you have to leave it out for a certain length of time to let it dry out before you can, re-insulate, rebuild.
Now these are, they own the trailer or they rent it?
Yes, people who live there rent the land and own the trailer.
So they have a lot of stake in the condition of the trailer.
Absolutely. When a trailer gets, jostled on its foundation, and you can't even close the front door anymore, and the trailers are not necessarily that expensive, but the question is, how much do you spend on repairing a trailer that's not worth a whole lot? And if you don't, how is anybody going to be able to afford a new trailer to replace it? It's a catch-22. I mean, trailer parks, had their problems before the storm, and after the storm, it's just.
Has the governor or any other big official come to the trailer park?
I know that Mrs. Christie has come to the recovery center. I don't know whether she went to the trailer park specifically, but she has come up to meet folks in BOAD. BOAD being the volunteer organizations active in disaster. Bergen County has a long-term recovery group that is actually doing pretty well. Because we had Hurricane Irene a while back, the infrastructure was in place to respond to a storm. So we got started pretty early. We have gotten some Robin Hood grants and so forth. The governor's, Mrs. Christie's fund is, I think, giving us a grant and giving us more. But it's not just about the money, because how do you fix a problem that is likely to recur? With the climate change that we have, we know that storms are going to be more frequent and more violent. So which buildings, I guess they're still working on flood areas and which buildings need to be lifted and which not. So
now in your press release,
yeah.
there was general dissatisfaction on it. I would say. I think the general tenor was, okay, you've done the show at the boardwalk, you've opened up the boardwalk, but you know you still got a lot of other problems.
If you look at the community development block grant request that the governor put out for 1.8 billion, it covers a lot of homeowners. It really does very little for renters, for tenants. It does actually, HUD did take a look at it and improve that a little bit, but it's still nowhere near where it should be. People in this area, most of the houses were not damaged, 80, 100%. They probably lost the whole first floor. They lost their cars. A couple of weeks after the storm, I rode down a street in Moonachie. Every car had a red sticker. Junk it. It was like when the disaster recovery center was open in the Hackensack courthouse that FEMA and the organizations ran. People couldn't get from Moonachie to Hackensack, which is only a 10-minute drive. They didn't have cars. There's one bus that goes every 2 hours.
You were telling me about one disabled person, if you could repeat that story?
Sure. She was the caretaker for her husband with Alzheimer's, and they lost their van, the shed in the back of their trailer, which had her scooter in it. So she was basically isolated in that trailer for 2 or 3 months after the storm without any way to get out. Bergen County United Waste Compassion.
3 months?
Months. Yes. Bergen County United Waste Compassion Fund bought her a new scooter, just said, find what she needs, get her a scooter. But it took a long time to figure out how to get a ramp for her. So there she was with the scooter that she couldn't use because she didn't have a ramp. I'm not quite, But the good news is that we did find somebody to cover the ramp. She does have a scooter, a ramp, and she's mobile again.
Now let me get back to Occupy. Occupy was started as Occupy Wall Street.
Right.
And it said, the Great Recession was just another example of financial mismanagement and disasters. And people, the target was Wall Street. There was a demand for change. So how did it get involved with response to Hurricane Sandy?
Well, there are a lot of networks built during that time, both in the park and after the park. When
were you at Zuccotti Park?
I did not camp at Zuccotti Park at all. I did go in kind of every other Saturday. I would go in with like some vitamins or some socks or something and go and see what was going on, take some words out, and so I sent my pizzas via the internet and so forth. So I was more of a support than actual occupier at that point. But what happened is when the storm hit, there were a lot of networks that had been formed, and a lot of people saying, "Hey, my neighbors need help. Those neighbors are, that block down there really needs." So people jumped together and with their connections went out and started knocking on doors and finding out, what can we do to help? How can we help you as neighbors? And the New York branch started earlier, and they were getting calls about New Jersey. And there were some occupiers working out in New Jersey, I think, but two of our organizers who worked with the Interoccupy system, which is the tech support system that really all the occupies use to communicate and to have conference calls and so forth, said, okay, we're going to kind of spearhead getting New Jersey going. And we started nightly conference calls talking about urgent needs throughout the state and how we could work together. I found somebody I hadn't known from Englewood who was like 15 miles from home, who had set up a Facebook page, Sandy Relief Englewood. And I said, oh, wow, let's connect. And so we did. And now she is working very strongly in Little Ferry and Moonachie. I'm doing more support work.
And you have people all the way down to Wildwood and Cape May.
We have a big area in Union Beach and Keensburg, run by a survivor who, I don't know, I guess her mold has finally been cleaned out of her house. She just learned that it may have to be elevated or knocked down or something. So but she's organized. She's working with some community groups in there. She got a grant for a community garden. They now have a garden with fruit trees and so forth and tomatoes, so they can grow some food.
Let me ask now. I know you don't have that much more time. So Occupy started first. The media ignored it. Then, when it was so big, they had to pay a lot of attention to it, and everything was Occupy.
Right.
Then powers that be decided they were going to crush it, and they sent them out of Zuccotti and San Francisco and all these other places. And you know the whole thing. This is dirty, drugs, blah blah blah, and then Occupy was gone from the parks to a large extent. Then you got now all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, with Occupy Sandy and similar kinds of things, all of a sudden good press.
Right.
Then is there an attempt to say, well, let's just divert these people into do good work and to get rid of their focus on the whole economy?
Well, there may be. I don't know. I can't very well speak for what they're trying to do. I know that we are trying to not just do charity. We're not about, okay, so we'll find you food, we'll find you this. It's about building that community garden that people in the community can take care of. It's about having the town squares to bring people together and say, what are the issues that you need help vocalizing the powers that be. It's about sitting on the long-term recovery groups, yes, to support them, but also to watchdog and say, hey, but what about, I'm hearing everything about Moonachie and Little Ferry. Aren't there other towns? Well, sure enough, World Renew had time. World Renew goes out to disasters and canvases so that the long-term recovery groups knows what the unmet needs are. Well, they called around, hey, they found this very small area in Lyndhurst that was really hard hit, so they brought that back to the table.
So you're expanding your contacts and still keeping with the larger mission.
We went down to one of the press conferences that Governor Christie had at one of the town halls, and one of our organizers stood up and said, there's a trailer park down in Wildwood. What's happening there? No answer, but the question was brought to the table, and we're going to continue watching that. And our organizer in Wildwood herself was in a damaged house above a store. That building was very damaged. She was staying in another place that she had problems there as well. We're working with her to help her community.
Well, I want to thank you very much for this interview, and we got some sense of some of the challenges and some of the promise and the work of Occupy Sandy.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.